Alright, what's up everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, aka Delks Moses, aka anoints himself in Greece, governed by caprice. Shout out to Andre Beja in the chat. He says, Simon, what up, man? What up, Andre Beja, Persian Detje? Shout out to Andre Beja out there, always coming into the live stream, showing love. And shout out to everybody else who will jump into the live stream chat. And today, we are continuing Book 10 in the Book to React series. This is Racism in Europe, written by a white professor named Neil MacMaster from East Anglia University, a living professor who is known in history, well renowned for his research, and this is a fabulous book that came out in 2001. We started this book about 2 days ago. Go check out part 1 and part 2, where we basically completed the introduction. For today's live stream, we're reading the first part of chapter 1 in part 1 of this book, where he talks about the early beginnings, the creations of whiteness, and how race started to permeate and spread throughout Europe. You can pick up this book on Amazon for the humble price of only $22 in paperback, $66 hardcover, and it has great ratings on Amazon as well. So support the author, support literary research, support your boy on this channel for trying to do educational content for free for the people. By donating to this channel, you can hit the super chat or also hit the PayPal as well. Everything is appreciated. It goes towards continuing my studies, and it goes towards helping keep this educational, very black channel alive. As I said, we finished the introduction where basically he outlines many of the major themes in this book, and we're jumping into part 1, 1870 to 1914. So, the new age of the new imperialism was to see the emergence of a modern racism that emphasized the ineradicable biological and cultural difference between Europeans and external colonial others, as well as the simultaneous and deepening divide between Europeans and internal groups that were seen as alien, particularly the Jews. The forms of scientific and popular racism that took root during this period established all the essential features of the racism that assumed a wider and more threatening political form during the interwar period. Part 1 ends on the eve of the First World War, since this marked a crucial watershed, the collapse of the German, Russian, and Austrian empires, revolutionary turmoil, and conditions for the growth of fascist and right-wing nationalistic movements. Chapter 2 examines the impact of colonial and anti-black propaganda during the age of high imperialism, and how this assumed a widespread form within the boundaries of Europe in spite of the small black presence. Chapter 3 looks at the growth of anti-Semitism, which provided beyond any question the dominant form of political racism throughout the period 1870 to 1945. However, before examining these two predominant forms of racism, Chapter 1 investigates the nature of white self-referential racism, which assumed a particularly acute expression between 1870 and 1914 through social Darwinism, eugenics, and ideas of national hygiene and efficiency. White fin de siècle, Europe experienced a profound sense of anxiety about its own racial substance and a fear of physical degeneration that it tried to counter through state intervention and biopower. So there's a lot in this book that's going to be very profound, very deep. Looking forward to reading all of this, but he is dropping a lot of phrases in here that I do not know. I do not know. So let's look up fin de siècle. I gotta look up this meaning. All right, so relating to the characteristics of the end of the century, especially the 19th century. Okay, fin de siècle. All right, I think siècle means century in French. Why don't people just say end of the century? I hate when people drop these French phrases to try to seem fancy. Let's put this in the chat. Fin de siècle. It's an adjective meaning the end of the century, especially the 19th century. So nothing wrong with looking up a word. Nothing wrong with admitting what you don't know. Let's put that in here. So, number 1, the white race, degeneration and eugenics. One of the paradoxes of European racism is that its language seems to be centered on or engrossed with the negative characteristics of the other. Blacks, libidinous, dirty, lazy, or Jews, grasping, parasitical, cunning. Whereas the reverse side of the coin, the construction of European whiteness, is strangely absent. The overwhelming concern with the moral and physical features of the other means that the European is occluded. Within most texts, white identity and its essential characteristics are implicit, taken for granted, and thus become the unspoken norm, the measuring stick from which all other racial groups deviate. Basically, what he's trying to say here is that when the whites write that the blacks are this, that means that we are not. And most of the time, when they write about black people, it's negative. When they write about Jews, it's negative. And the inference, by and large, is that the white is positive as they're reading these texts or seeing the images that were put in front of them by the ruling classes of their time, whether that be then or now. Continuing here. So the invisibility of whiteness is unstated. Its unstated nature derives from the fact that in Western culture, through language and representation, whites have an almost universal and central role as a standard of biological and aesthetic excellence. Few Christians take conscious note, let alone realize the significance of the fact that the predominant Western image of Jesus Christ, a Jewish Palestinian, is of a blue-eyed Aryan with long fair tresses. It is only in recent years that scholars have begun to explore more systematically the historical and psychological processes through which white identity has been constructed. This self-reflection by white Europeans is central to an understanding of how racism has historically functioned. As Richard Dyer comments, as long as race is something only applied to non-white peoples, as long as white people are not racially seen and named, they/we function as a human norm. Other people are raced. We are just people. Going here to Andrew Beha. He says, your mic is tweaking. Your mic is tweaking. Let me know if it is. Let me know if it is. It sounds like it's good here. I checked all my levels before I turned on the stream. The mic sounds good to me. So, all right, if it sounds like it's messing up, please let me know. Let me know if it's messing up now. All right. Let me know if it's messing up now. But also let me know what you think about this, Andrew Beha. You, I assume, are a white European. How were you first informed of your whiteness? How did you first come to the conception now that you were white? When did you first have those realizations that you are racialized as white? When did you first discover that? I would like for you to know and speak up as we're doing these white studies in this live stream. The second thing I have to say is that I find it very interesting that he brought up the point of the white Jesus. Usually this is something that only non-white people bring up, right? We bring up the fact that the images of Jesus do not look like who we imagine the historical Jesus to be. Most likely Jesus looked like a brown, dark-skinned Palestinian Middle Eastern man, right? And some people argue that Jesus could have been very dark-skinned and looked like Simon Hill Keeps It Trail, possibly just with hair. But why is it that we still have these images of Jesus, knowing how historically inaccurate it is, and also knowing all this history? It's because it is a tool to continue to push forward white supremacy. Andrew Beha says, I looked at my skin. Well, Andrew Beha, are you a translucent man? Are you a person without color, devoid of color? Because whiteness does not mean anything. There is no white person on the planet. You are not white in your skin the same way I am not black. I am a nice chocolate hue. I am a dark hue of brown. And I am pretty sure that you are a beige man or a very light tan man. So let me know how you first discovered that you were white, in the sense that you are part of a transnational identity that goes beyond looking at the skin. Because there are people that are considered white who have probably skin the same color as me, right? Depending on where they come from. Because once again, race is a social construct. So let me know how you thought about that, Andrew Beha. Continuing here. Racist ideologies are invariably relational and work through binary oppositions between us, the superior group that engages in the process of racialization, and them, the inferior target group. Social psychology suggests that the other is crucial to the process by which boundaries or frontiers of identity are constructed. You know who you are only by knowing who you are not. A key feature of racial categorizations of the other is that they invariably represent a projection and negative inversion of the central moral, aesthetic, and cultural values of the dominant group. Basically, once again, reiterating the point that when the other is described, it is often in negative opposition to the person who is describing it. And usually, at least in the case of the white European, when they were creating all these racial hierarchies and classes and distinctions between people, they were saying that the other group is like this and we are better because we are not like that. All right. Andrew Beha says, but I'm like a little too much tanned. Exactly the point. So, Andrew Beja, once again, I am asking you the question. I know how hard it is to ask an Albanian a question. I know how hard it is, but Andrew Beja, let's try to use some of those brain cells in your head and let me know when you were first racialized as white. When did you discover that you were part of a larger group of people who might have various cultures or skin tones or languages or nationalities, but yet and still you would be racialized as white? When did you first discover that? All right, Andre Beja is talking about his elbows now, and he is still not getting to the point. He is just, this is the problem with doing this type of intellectual work on YouTube. You're going to get all types of people in your classroom, all types of people. Poor Andre Beja. Anyway, continuing here. So, a key feature of racial categorizations of the other is that they invariably represent a projection and a negative inversion of the central moral, aesthetic, and cultural values of the dominant group. As was seen in the introduction, when Europeans described blacks as inherently lazy, what they meant implicitly was that white Europeans were naturally dynamic, busy, and enterprising. And likewise, if blacks were libidinous, dirty, diseased, ugly, thieving, cowardly, stupid, and superstitious, then Europeans were sexually restrained and monogamous, clean and healthy, fair and beautiful in form, honest and brave, intelligent and moral. Europeans, those racializing the other, simultaneously racialize themselves. Such rules of binary opposition are common to many types of group boundary definition, from family, tribe, and village to nationalism and ethnicity. Where modern racism differs from these other forms is that it naturalizes difference in absolute biological or cultural terms so that barriers between collectives are rendered impermeable. The French racist theoretician Vacher de Lapouge typically formulated this by the claim that it was impossible for immigrants ever to become French. The prince can no more make a Frenchman from a Greek or a Moroccan than he can bleach the skin of a Negro, make round the eyes of a Chinaman, or change a woman into a man. That's wild. Well, that's wild. All right, Andre Beja says, I'm dying. I'm dying. Well, Andre Beja, we don't want you to die. We want you to live. I know you might be laughing and stuff, but listen, we can have a joking, funny conversation, but let's actually talk about the topic at hand, which is the creation of whiteness, right? We're doing white studies right now. We're studying your people. We're studying your people right now. We're studying your people, Andre Beja. So let us know when you were first racialized as white. I'll ask the question multiple times. Probably still not get a good answer. Anyway. In this chapter, we are concerned with self-referential racism, the processes by which Europeans designated themselves as a superior race, as opposed to hetero-referential racism and the negative stereotyping of inferior others, which, although part of the same process, will, for the purpose of analysis, be treated in later chapters. Self-referential racism is of particular interest during the period before the First World War, since European society was haunted by the specter of its own degeneration, while at the same time many felt that they had discovered the solution to physical decay in the first scientific methods for the eugenic breeding of a superior racial type. The European racial project has had as much to do with technologies for the transformation of its own group biological substance as it did with the segregation, exclusion, or extermination of inferior breeds. So basically what he's saying is that, the transmission of white identity, transnational whiteness, the creation of this concept of race infected the European mind and affected European history just as much as segregation, colonialism, or the idea that they were going to eventually conquer and eliminate groups of people. All right, Andre Beja says, bro, number one, I am not your brother. I am not your brother. I am not your brother. I have one brother, and he is not you. So, yes, Andre Beja says, chill with the white. Well, if you don't like white studies, you can leave. On this channel, this is an educational channel. This is a classroom. I am your professor. If you don't like my teaching, you can drop out. You can drop out of class. You can drop out of class, but I'm guarantee you, you won't get an education like this nowhere else. Let's continue here. Race and degeneration. Degeneration was an age-old theme in European thought, but in the past, the idea of social decadence had been treated in moral and religious terms. For example, 18th century thinkers portrayed the decline and fall of ancient Rome, as well as the imminent fall of modern European civilization, in terms of luxury, excess, a softening of the will, and a physical exhaustion that was a consequence of moral turpitude. sounds very similar today when people say, yeah, basically our society has become decadent. Strong men made this great society, and great societies make weak men, and weak men make weak societies, etc., etc. It sounds very similar. In the second half of the 19th century, the concept of degeneration moved to center stage, became an all-pervasive concern, and found a new authoritative expression through scientific theories of evolution, morbidity, and psychophysical abnormality. All right, Andre Beja says, no, I love your teaching. Well, shout out to you, Andre Beja. We're trying to teach here. We're trying to teach. Anyway, so the language of degeneration, basically the idea that society is becoming weak, it's becoming decrepit, it's becoming grandiose, it's becoming decadent. This idea that our societies have been degenerating has existed at the time that people now think was the golden age. People nowadays, especially people on the right wing, say, can't we go back to the past when women were women and men were men and we were strong and we had kings and generals and heroic figures, big dick motherfuckers of the 20th century and the early and late 19th century? And even then, the people were saying, we're a decadent society. Everything's going to fall. We're in the age of collapse. So, the language of degeneration was widely deployed in relation to inferior races, and in particular to the idea that interbreeding between races or miscegenation inevitably led to an irreversible deterioration in the physical and intellectual qualities of hybrid groups. A radical opposition to race mixing had been a widespread feature of colonial and slave societies from the 17th century onwards. The French, for example, legislated against intermarriage in Guadeloupe in 1711. And in Louisiana in 1724. I didn't even know that. I'm from Louisiana. Who knew that anti-black legislation preventing black people from marrying who they wanted to marry and love who they wanted to love goes back more than 300 years? To prevent what one missionary called a criminal coupling of women and men of different species, whence comes a fruit which is one of nature's monsters. Colonial racism of this type was eventually integrated into 19th century scientific racist systems, like the highly influential Essays on the Inequality of the Races of the Count Gobineau, who I wrote a paper about. Very interesting fellow. Gobineau, who was to have a major impact on German racism after the turn of the century, elaborated a theory of history in terms of the inexorable decline of civilizations through racial mixing and the degradation and enervation of the Aryan, the most brilliant and superior type. However, within the borders of the end of the century Europe, end of the 19th century, fin de siècle Europe, as opposed to colonial society, the central preoccupation was not with the dangers presented by misalliance with inferior races, largely absent from the continent, so much as with the generalized biological deterioration of the white race itself. So, Doer of L says the term modernity is attached to the homosocial conditioning of society. Explain what you mean by homosocial conditioning. Explain what you mean by homosocial conditioning. Do you mean all humans being conditioned to be generally the same, and that is what modernity means? Explain what you mean, Doravel. Never heard this phrase before. Anyway, continuing here, very interesting paragraph. Basically what he's saying is that, the idea of mixing the races, and remember, the Europeans viewed themselves, amongst themselves, as differing races as well. The Slavs were different than the Celts, and the French were different than the Germans, etc., like weird stuff. Let's continue here. So the term degeneration was used to refer to a whole range of social pathologies that threaten the biological substance of the European race or races, from alcoholism, tuberculosis, and venereal disease, to lack of physical training, cretinism, and sexual perversion. While the late 19th century was superficially an age of unprecedented optimism in the power of science and progress, among its writers and artists, from Ibsen and Zola to Gerhard Hauptmann, there were all signs of a more morbid and deepening pessimism, in which the metaphors of disease, madness, and decay proliferated. As Max Nordau commented in his book Degeneration, 1892, we stand now in the midst of a severe mental epidemic, of a sort of Black Death of degeneration and hysteria, the growing anxiety that Europe was confronted with a profound inner crisis, a process of biological decay. was to receive its most sophisticated analysis and resolution in social Darwinism and the science of eugenics and racial hygiene. The drive towards the rescue of the European race or of the national stock between circa 1870 and circa 1914 needs to be placed within the broader context of the Darwinian revolution. So basically what he's saying here is that degeneration, the idea that society is going down the drain, mixed a lot of different things that sound very similar today. The fear of the other crossing into European lands, we see that today with people worried about migration from all parts of the world, specifically the Muslim part of the world, the Arab part of the world, the Central Asian part of the world coming to Europe, and also parts of Africa as well, crossing the Mediterranean. Also the other stuff, alcoholism, drug use, sexual perversion. We see that now with gender ideology, the right's obsession with gender ideology and other people's activities with their genitalia freaks out the right wing a lot. So yeah, a lot of what was happening back in the late 19th century and all throughout the beginning of the 20th century is very similar to what we're seeing today as far as the perversions in the mind of the white man, right? Let's continue here. So, Social Darwinism. Darwin's key work on the origin of species, published in 1859, had an enormous and rapid impact throughout Europe, from Russia to Portugal. Translations appeared in all the major languages. For example, German and Dutch editions appeared in 1860, French 1862, Russian 1864, Italian 1864 and 1865, and Spanish in 1877. Darwin's evolutionary theory was by no means the only one that determined social and political thought in the period after 1860. For example, for some decades, the impact of Darwinism in France was quite weak, since French scientific thought remained largely entrenched within the paradigm of Lamarckian evolution, which maintained that acquired characteristics could be inherited. However, despite the many theoretical and often contradictory strands that went to make up the late 19th century evolutionary theory, Darwinism undoubtedly provided the paradigm of the age, the most influential and sophisticated explanation for the mutation of the species. In the origins, Darwin studiously avoided applying his theory of natural selection to humans since, in the age when Christianity was still extremely influential, he wished to avoid controversy. However, the cat was out of the bag, and well before Darwin came to explore the implications of his theory for human evolution in The Descent of Man, published in 1871, numerous scientists had eagerly seized upon his ideas and, in applying them to human societies, began to develop the general body of theory known as Social Darwinism. Going back up here to Neo-Lamarckian evolution. I just learned this actually a few weeks ago in one of my classes at university, that there was a guy in France named Lamarck who had the idea of evolution before Darwin to some degree. But his idea is more of a linear type of evolution, that species are changing and evolving and adapting over generations to eventually perfect themselves. How Darwin's theory works is a bit different. Evolution and change and adaptation is random, and it doesn't have any sort of end point of perfection. Because if that were the case, then how could any species go extinct? Continuing here, when Darwin published his work, it spread all over Europe, right? And Darwin didn't talk about, human evolution because, he was scared of the Catholic Church and everything, but the people who picked up his work applied it to humans, and that's how we got, social Darwinism, race science, etc. At least that's where I think MacMaster is going. Going into the comment section, Door of L says, the term modern is used to indicate a great freedom of morals. Thus, when the police in Toulon arresting a young man, Giovanni Conforti, he retorted that he was a modern man who loves people of both sexes. Homosexuality had become synonymous with the rejection of conventions. A History of Homosexuality in Europe, Volume 1 and 2, Berlin, London, Paris, 1919 and 1939. Florence Taman. Is used to indicate a great freedom of morals. If modern means a great freedom of morals, haven't we always had a great freedom of morals, just in general, like before the creation of the nation state and the idea that the state could not be involved in people's religious activities or oppressing people for religions? Mankind, in an anarchic state, has always had a great freedom in its more people that have been Muslim, Christian, animist, atheist, Hindu, Buddhist, Shintoist, etc., etc. We've had a great freedom of morals. And at certain points in time, under certain types of regimes, those other types of morals have been, I could say, oppressed. Just look at the Jews, for example, right? So if this guy, Giovanni Conforti, replied that he was a modern man and he just wanted to love another man, have sex with another man, how was that wrong? It sounds actually more in line with humanity as it has always existed. Humans have done all sorts of wild things. Have sex with other men, have sex with women, have sex with multiple men at one time, have sex with multiple women at one time. How is this any different than what humans have always done? We've just been wild beings that just want to feel pleasure, have fun, that want to commune with God, that want to have different experiences. I'm very interested where you're trying to go with this, Door of L. Are you implying that modernity is tied with homosexuality, and that's the only thing that modernity is tied to? Or are you implying that modernity is somehow wrong because it accepts that people could have a freedom of morals and choose to have sex with men and not find that morally reprehensible? I'm very interested to know what you think, what you're trying to get at here. Let the right wingers out, man. Let the right wingers out. We're going to let them rock. At least we got some people thinking in here. The point of these live streams is just to get y'all thinking and get you talking and get you actually reading a book, because a lot of you motherfuckers don't read shit. Anyway, Door of L just said yes. I asked him like 3 different questions and he just replied yes. Come on, man. Take your time to write your answers. The same way I'm taking my time to read this book, take your time to write your answers. You don't have to automatically shoot it out. I will read it if you put it in the okay. All right. Anyway, I'm going to jump ahead here. So, continuing here. So, the basic premise of social Darwinism was that natural selection had, over geological time, ensured that those organisms which were best adapted to the environment would survive and pass on their inherited advantages, while the weak and maladaptive would die and, in doing so, fail to reproduce. Social Darwinists believed that such processes of selection were at work within contemporary societies. It was in the long-term interest of the human species that competition and war should ensure the reproduction of the strongest and most intelligent individuals and the most biologically superior race nations. The influential social Darwinist Karl Pearson, for example, wrote that the scientific definition of a nation is that of an organized whole kept up to a high pitch of internal efficiency by ensuring that its numbers are substantially recruited from the better stocks, and kept up to a high pitch of external efficiency by contest, chiefly by way of war with inferior races, and with equal races by the struggle for trade routes and for the source of raw material and of food supply. So, basically what they're trying to say here is that early Europeans, when they started social Darwinism, basically were Viltrumites. If you've seen the TV show Invincible, the cartoon TV show about superheroes, right, in this very graphic, bloody war, right, to control Earth, the Viltrumites are these alien species that basically fight and kill each other infinitely until only the strongest survive. And then they spread out the Viltrumites all over the galaxies, all over the universe, to try to conquer as many planets and to find challengers, right? Very similar also to Dragon Ball Z, right? What did the Saiyans want? The Saiyans just want to fight each other and fight other races to find out who's the strongest fighter, etc., etc. So yeah, basically this is like the basic ABCs of social Darwinism in the minds of the early European. So, social Darwinism assumed the form of a class racism, an expression of the mounting fear of the European bourgeoisie faced with the growth of huge and dangerous proletarian slums in the major cities, from London and Paris to Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. The poor, pullulating in urban rookeries. Pullulating. I have never heard this word. Did he mean polluting? Is that a typo? Man, this man is using some words I have never heard. Pullulate. I have to look up what this means. Multiplier spread prolifically or rapidly. Pullulates. We learn some new words every day. Let's put that in the chat. Hold on. Pullulate. Okay. It's a verb. All right. Hold on. I need a person to professionally do the definitions for me. And I just got to say, definition, put it in the chat. Definition, man, hop in the chat. Anyway, social Darwinism assumed the form of class racism, an expression of the mounting fear of the European bourgeoisie faced with the growth of huge and dangerous proletarian slums in the major cities, from London and Paris to Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. The poor, pullulating in urban rookeries, meaning a lot of poor who were having a lot of children continuing to burst out of the slums, provided a concentrated mass in which epidemics, crime, immorality, and socialism could breed, threatening to burst out and to swamp the civilized order in a wave of primitive barbarism, as it had in the Paris Commune of 1871. As George Sims said of the London poor, it has now got into a condition in which it cannot be left. The mighty mob of famished, diseased, and filthy helots is getting dangerous, physically, morally, politically dangerous. The barriers which have kept it back are rotten and giving way, and it may do the state a mischief if it be not looked to in time. Its fevers and its filth may spread to the homes of the wealthy. Its lawless armies may sally forth and give us the taste of the lesson the mob has tried to teach now and again in Paris. So basically what he's saying is like, the rich bourgeoisie people at the time, looked at the poor who were now flooding into the cities to work at the factories for dollars a day and barely getting enough to get by, right? We're going to bring disease and depravity and socialism, God forbid. They were going to try to socialize the economy and make things more fair and equal for everybody and give themselves a good living standard. They tried to racialize them, right? So, the deep anxiety of the educated elites faced with the rise of the masses and access to the vote, the spread of revolutionary political movements and trade unions found expression in a racialization of the working class. Louis Chevalier has shown how the Parisian bourgeoisie increasingly deployed a language that described the class dangerouses in racial terms, or the dangerous classes in racial terms, as primitive and instinctual beings who carried all the inherited stigmata of the savage: sexual potency, low intelligence, moral corruption, violence, and raw animality. The French historian Taine, who studied medicine and psychiatry, deployed an evolutionary and medical language to plot the course of French history. With the Revolution of 1789, he wrote, "We see all of a sudden spring forth the barbarian, and still worse the primitive animal, the grinning, sanguinary baboon, who chuckles while he slays." The Italian criminal anthropologist Lombroso, in line with an older tradition of phrenology, developed after 1870 a photographic system to record the primitive features of the criminal type, who, like some evolutionary throwback, showed all the hereditary features of the savage. The criminal, he claimed, was an atavistic being who reproduces in his person the ferocious instincts of primitive humanity and the inferior animals. Thus were explained anatomically the enormous jaws, high cheekbones, prominent superciliary arches, solitary lines of the palms, extreme size of the orbits, handle-shaped ears found in the criminals, savages and apes, insensibility to pain, extremely acute sight, tattooing, excessive idleness, love of orgies, okay, and the irresponsible cravings of evil for its own sake. The desire not only to extinguish life in the victim, but to mutilate the corpse, tear its flesh, and drink its blood. Damn, that's heavy metal. That's heavy fucking metal. Anyway, what he's trying to say here, this guy, I heard about him before, the Italian criminal anthropologist Lombroso. He's basically the one that said you could look at a person and tell if they're criminal. And mostly he was applying it to like white folks, right? And he said if you had a certain eyebrow structure, a certain wrinkle on your forehead, certain like ways of your cheeks or lips being placed, right? Then you're more likely to be a criminal, right? Especially if you also are prone to other types of activity, having tattoos or piercings, etc. And some of Lombroso's ideas stick around with us today. There are some people that still say he looks like a bad guy, right? Well, that comes from Lombroso, this Italian anthropologist who basically said, I can look at your nose, how your nose looks, how your eyebrows look, how your ears are placed, and tell you look like a criminal, right? He mostly did this with white people at first, but then it extended to non-white people, right? So So, doer of L said, the do as thou wilt ideology leads to extinction. You know what I find the least masculine type of trait? If there is such a thing as general masculinity that's inherent in men, biological men, you know what I find the least masculine trait? Is characteristics similar to Door of L. A man who wants to say something but doesn't say it. A man who beats around the bush. A man who pussyfoots. Because Door of L came in here basically trying to say that modernity equals homosexuality, but he refuses to actually say it. He refuses to actually say it for, I don't know what, any type of fear, because he's a faceless anon online who just probably has sexual hangups about himself. So he wants to try to beat around the bush and talk about homosexuality without saying it. But the least masculine trait, fellas, for all of y'all out there, is not saying what's really in your heart. You are not a man. You are not a true man unless you just say what you want to fucking say. That's why I put my face out here. That's why I come on here and I have my real name in my YouTube channel. Because I will not back down or apologize for anything I say unless I've actually given it real sincere thought and realized the error of my ways, or I've changed my opinion. But if you really dislike gay people, just say it. Door of L, just write it in the chat. I hate gay people and modernity equals homosexuality, and I believe that's wrong. Just say that. Because Door of L is saying the modernity ideology is one that means anything goes. Modernity also means that black people get to be free. Modernity also means that women don't have to stay in the kitchen. Modernity also means that we don't have to bury our newborn infants if they're born autistic. That's what modernity also means. That's what modernity also means. If modernity means that somebody can have booty sex with another man, I will take that any day as long as that keeps us out of chains. If modernity means that a woman is going to eat some cooch, I will take that over us being in chains any day. If modernity means that a man cuts off his penis, puts his balls inside of him and makes a vagina, I will take that any day over us being in chains. I don't get why y'all are so obsessed about men sucking other men's dicks. You gotta want to suck dick if you constantly are bitching about men sucking other dicks. You seriously must want to suck a dick. Just say that. Because this is the least masculine trait, to worry about what another man does with his penis. There is nothing masculine about telling another man what to do with his penis or what a woman puts in her mouth, whether it's pussy or a dick. You must be wildin'. You have to be wildin'. Anyway, continuing here. The idea that modern man might contain, buried within himself, dark instinctive forces that threaten to overwhelm the thin veneer of civilized behavior also found expression in the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud, as well as in the literature, from the Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde to the unspeakable horror faced by the adventurer Kurtz in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Although space does not enable the full treatment which it deserves, it can be noted that the language of race was invariably also a language of gender and of a science that presented women as biologically and morally inferior. As Nancy Stepan has shown, women, like primitives, were thought to be of a lower order, less evolved and similar to children in their intellectual and emotional development. Women were also prone to regression, particularly when in a crowd, to descend into atavistic forms of savagery, bloodlust, and even cannibalism. As with class, the naturalization of difference between male and female was used as an ideological barrier to the rise of feminism. If women constituted a separate race and were locked into the inferior and hereditary characteristics of their group, there was no way that educational reform or any other measures could enable them to undertake the functions of the superior male. So entrenched and universal were sexist differentiations in European society and culture that the perceived absolute separation of male and female could also work in the opposite direction, to feminize inferior male races. All right. Doravel is in the chat going hard. The quote that I gave says it. I do not hate gay people. I dislike them shoving it down our throats publicly. I think the only thing getting shoved down a throat, Doravel, is the hypothetical penis that you want. Because nobody is making you look at homosexual activity. You're the only one obsessed with it. This book hasn't even talked about homosexuals at all. There is nothing in this book about homosexuals. And still you brought your gay activity into this chat. Doravel, literally in this book, if I type in Control F, probably the word homosexual shows up once, probably towards the end of the book. Literally, not a single word in this book has talked about men having sex with men. You jumped in here and started talking about that. Y'all are crazy. I swear, every right winger, every conservative black man is obsessed with gay people to the point that I think they're gay. You cannot come in here in my live stream talking about gay people when we're not talking about them at all and have dick on your mind. You have dick on your mind, Dorval. I cannot understand that. He says here, this is hilarious. He says, I could care less about what someone does in their own bedroom. Then why are you bringing it up? Nobody was talking about it. Me and the fellas were sitting around having a chat, talking about the history of whiteness. We were talking about these hoes. We were talking about how, white Jesus makes no sense. And here you came bursting into the door talking about a man having sex with another man. Dorval, you are the problem. You are the problem. You are the type. You are shoving homosexuality down my throat. I was not talking about it at all. Dorval says, I am a 60-year-old man, so I have seen what goes on more than you being a younger man. Yes, you have seen more than me, because I've never seen gay porn. I've never seen gay porn, but Dorval, you are talking like a man who has a fascination with homosexual lifestyles, and you really want to live it. You remind me of the old man in that show, that Tyler Perry show, Beauty in Black. I don't get it. Dorval says, I was just bringing up the fact that modern is a term that is twisted. No, it's not. You twisted it. Literally nobody thinks that modern means homosexuality. No scholar, no philosopher, no sociologist, no anthropologist would say modernity means homosexuality and base it off one quote of some guy who was caught having sex in a sauna. That's you, Dorval. You're the one talking about that. That's insane. Literally insane. Y'all are crazy. Stop shoving homosexuality down my throat. We're not talking about that. Anyway, continuing here. Returning to social Darwinism and eugenics. A central idea of these movements was that the further modern societies developed, the more they created welfare systems that interfered with the laws of natural selection. For tens of thousands of years, prehistoric man and even more recent pre-industrial man had progressed as a racial type in intelligence and physique through the harsh but necessary impact of disease, famine, and tribal warfare that remorselessly weeded out sickly individuals or entire non-adaptive groups. As Ribbett commented in his Hereditary 1875, medical science and improved resources makes more and more certain the future of children by saving the lives of the countless weak, deformed, or otherwise ill-constituted creatures that would surely have died in a savage race or in our own country a century ago. Across Europe, social Darwinists pointed to the same underlying problem of the modern age. The immense growth of cities created the social problems associated with overcrowding and filthy, airless slums, a brutalized residuum that sought to escape its miserable existence through alcoholism and sexual license, and which sank even deeper into physical and moral degeneration. However, this pale and wretched race, instead of dying out, was able to survive through the growing intervention of charitable organizations and local and central government welfare. During the second half of the 19th century, all European states engaged in welfare programs that attempted to alleviate the conditions of the urban poor, from slum housing regulation, health inspection, and sewage disposal, to medical dispensaries, public hospitals, and soup kitchens. The concern of the social Darwinists was that society was artificially keeping alive those sickly individuals who would, according to the laws of natural selection, have died out. The economist Alfred Marshall commented in 1885, charity and sanitary regulations are keeping alive in our large towns thousands of such feeble persons who would have died even 50 years ago. Public or private charity may palliate their misery, but the only remedy is to prevent such people from coming into existence. So basically what they're saying is like, at this time, more and more people are crowding into the cities, and some of the governments in the late 19th century, early 20th century are trying to do something to help the people. They're trying to do something to help the people. And the people who are in charge, right, think that they're trying to prevent people from dying and stuff like that. But some of the intellectuals don't like that. They say that, basically, why try to keep alive these drunkards, these sexually deviant people and stuff like that? Why try to do that when they should be dying? We want to make the race get better. And by having the race have all these polluted people in the gene pool, we're bringing ourselves down, is what he was trying to say. So let's continue here. So Dorval says, I haven't seen gay porn either. The way you talk about gay people, you must have some type of fascination with them. I just showed you the source. You're funny. I know, thank you. I am very funny. And yes, you showed me the source, and basically your text just said that some guy got caught having sex with another guy, and that was a crime during some time in some Western nation some time ago. And somehow that is the proof that all of modernity, all the architecture, all the literature, all the cinema, all the inventions, all the social movements, all the radical changes in government come down to homosexuality. That is insane. That is literally crazy people thinking. You literally have to be crazy to think that way. That would be like that would be like saying it all comes down to the fact that the PlayStation 2 was discontinued. Or something like that. Like all 9/11 was caused by the fact that the PlayStation 1 was discontinued. Like something like that. Like that's crazy. Like you literally have to have no brain cells to think that. Dorval says, I am a married man to a lovely, brilliant queen, longer than you have been alive. I have other research that ties the term modern to that. Okay, here's what I want you to do, Dorval. I want you to find out how modernity in architecture relates somehow to homosexuality. I want you to find out how modernity in relation to the civil rights movement, which was a part of the modern world being created, how that has to do with homosexuality. I want you to find out, Dorval, how many of the religious movements that were happening at the time of modernity were a part of homosexuality. Dorval, I ask you, I beg you, find out how the nationalistic movements and colonialism were tied somehow to modernity. I really, really want you to tell me how. Tell me how all of these things were tied to homosexuality. If you could show me how architecture, literature, the societies that we have today, in this postmodern world to some degree, how they all come down to men putting their penises in each other's butts. Please let me know. Please, because you seem to be obsessed with this, and this was not the point of my live stream. You're messing it up for everybody in my class. Now I know how my professors feel. Now I know how my professors feel when I just be talking to them and yelling at them and shit like that. You must be crazy. You have to be crazy talking to me this way. I do not understand how you could be supposedly 60 years old talking this way. All right. What was particularly disturbing to the social Darwinists was the growing demographic imbalance of society. While the improvident poor continued to breed without restraint, producing large numbers of enfeebled children, the educated elites were beginning to have smaller and smaller number of offspring, owing to late marriage, the use of birth control, egotism, and a lack of patriotic duty. The social Darwinists translated the bourgeois fear of being outnumbered by the masses into racial terms. An underlying assumption in the work of many thinkers was the elites constituted a kind of hereditary gene pool, in which the highest racial qualities of intelligence, moral strength, and physical beauty were preserved. The degeneration of the social racial stock of the nation as a whole carried major implications for the modern state. Social Darwinists were less concerned with the consequences of evolutionary theory for the individual than with the survival of the fittest as a contest between entire racial groups or race nations. The language of Darwinism became an expression of growing militaristic aggression and economic tension between states, a contest for power and domination both within the European continent as well as overseas in Africa and elsewhere. Those states that were the fittest, that were able to preserve or regenerate the racial substance of the nation, would inevitably be victorious in the competition with others, and in so doing would fulfill the destiny of the human race as a whole by ensuring that the most superior peoples would survive to reproduce the future species on a higher level. So basically what they're saying, once again, Wiltshire thinking. And once this is all hitting right at the worst time, if you think about it. Race science was happening at the same time Darwin was discovering, natural selection in nature and talking about how that made animals and plants change over time. That was happening at the same time the Europeans were going out into different parts of the world, colonizing and meeting other people and doing trade and business and stuff like that. All of that hit right at the same time to make the European powers that were also in Europe, look at each other as different races and give justifications for their belligerence towards each other. It was such a perfect storm, that late 19th century, early 20th century. Such a perfect storm. All right. So Door of L says, "You're really funny." Thank you. I appreciate that. I try to be entertaining and charmful with my audience. I try to be as cool, calm, collected, and hilarious as I can be. At the same time, we're doing this intelligent back and forth. So this is edutainment. This is edutainment in the words of KRS-One, Blastmaster. Anyway, Door of L says, "The term does not have a singular meaning, but you said that it had a singular root. You were implying earlier that modernity had a singular root. Of course, it doesn't have a singular meaning. I'm talking about the singular root, the casus belli. What is the reason we have modernity? And somehow you brought up homosexuality as if that means something, right? And let's really think about that. Let's say Dorvel, let's just say this. Let's say I agreed with you that homosexuality was somehow an aberration of human characteristic. Let's say I agreed with you that I think homosexuality is wrong. Or let's say I was pussy like you and I agreed with you, but I just hid behind the children. And I said, I wish they wouldn't shove it down the kids' throats or put it in children's faces. Let's say I thought that. Do you also deny that modernity also relates to the abolition of slavery, the ending of apartheid and segregation, the liberation to some degree of women, and social movements that advance other parts of society forward, even if other parts move backwards? Would you say that that's a bad thing? Would you say that you would rather us be slaves and in chains than rather have men willingly marry other men and women marry other women and people being able to change your genders? Would you be happy if we were back in apartheid, Jim Crow, segregation times where we couldn't go to the hotels we wanted or drive the cars we wanted or go through, get passports and leave the country if we wanted? If men were not allowed to marry other men, would you be happier then? Please explain how you think of that. Because bringing up one part of modernity that you disagree with, and then also trying to tie it to the roots of modernity, as if that's a problem, right? Makes me really wonder how somebody can have those types of cogs in their head to come to those types of conclusions. What motivates somebody to be a homophobe to such a degree that they'll bring up homosexuality in a topic that has nothing to do with it? I wonder. I can only wonder. I don't think about other men having sex with other men that much, like people like Dorval do. But continuing here, Dorval says, "You asked me to show and prove, just trying to do that." Okay, well, continue to try to show and prove, but I'm going to continue to roast you until you actually do. Dorval says, "I do enjoy your content, not trying to get this off track. I just wanted to add a contrast in word meaning." Okay, you added the contrast in word meaning, but you also added the contrast in the type of sexuality that we enjoy. I enjoy big titty, big booty women. I think about women all the time. All day I dream about sex with multiple women, singular women, famous women, broke women, poor women. I think about sex all the time. I think about sex with women. Dor L, all you do is think about sex with men. And you bring it up in context when we're talking about whiteness and the formation of the nation state. What does that say about you? I think about sex with women and you're over here typing to me about sex with men. If you were really a straight man and really were concerned about modernity, why aren't you over here talking about repopulating the earth by busting big nuts and big booties? Why are we talking about this? Why? Dorval says, "Words can be defined to mean whatever the author wants it to mean in their mind." So you decided, by that definition, Dorval, words can mean whatever they want to mean. In your mind, modern means that you can have sex with men. And somehow you're so uncomfortable with yourself that you don't want that to be. Dorval, modern means in your mind, you can have sex with men. Nobody's denying that. Even if you don't want to, you're saying that you can have sex with men, but that makes you uncomfortable. But that's what modernity means. I don't know. I guess so. I guess so, bro. Anyway, continuing here. Anyway, the Social Darwinism of Ernst Haeckel. Probably the most influential social Darwinist in Europe was Ernst Haeckel, born in 1843 and died in 1919. Professor of anatomy at Jena, and his ideas, translated into numerous languages, may be taken as typical of those which were sweeping the continent before the First World War. Haeckel, unlike the cautionist Darwin, was a keen propagandist who saw it as his prophetic mission to broadcast the lessons of evolutionary theory, the scientific key to universal understanding. Haeckel's most famous work, The Riddle of the Universe, 1899, had gone through 10 German editions by 1919 and was translated into 25 languages, while in 1906 he founded the Moinst League to ensure that evolutionary science would become the basis of individual and state actions. Haeckel had a huge impact. Not only was he a gifted populist, but his promise to unlock the secrets of the material universe, the laws of evolution and biology that controlled human destiny, was attractive to the general public, while his prestige as an outstanding scientist added legitimacy to his social Darwinism. So basically, this guy sounds like L. Ron Hubbard, basically a guy who wrote stuff out of his ass, but it sounded scientific. It sounded scientific, right? So basically, he just developed like a cult following through his writing. All right, going now to the comments. I'm in your house. What did I just walk in on? I'm debating this guy about, well, shout out to I'm in your house. We're doing a reading. We're reading a book here. And this guy, Dorvel, just jumped in here and started talking about gay people and talking about gay sex. I don't know why. Dorvel says, LOL, you got me cracking up. I guess so. You're cracking up, and I hope maybe you're cracking up laughing and hopefully not cracking open the crack of your ass to let another man fuck you. I hope you're cracking up laughing at what I have to say and not cracking open those booty cheeks to let another man slide up in it with Vaseline. I hope you're not trying to get your booty Vaseline, Dorvel. Coming in here talking about men putting fingers in Vaseline so they can put it in your booty. I hope that's not what you're into, Dorvel. I hope that's not what you're into, Dorvel. Put away the Vaseline. Stop thinking about gay sex. Stop coming on my channel talking about gay sex when we're talking about whiteness. Okay? Crack up at my jokes. Don't let niggas nut in the crack of your ass. Okay? All right? We good? Put the Vaseline down. Put the Vaseline down. All right, I'm in your house says, like, the first thing I heard opening the stream is bussin' nuts and booty. And the usual, how I'm in your house says, the usual pseudoscience. Well, shout out to I'm in your house as well. Dorvel, you got my whole fingers now Vaselined up, man. Vaselined up, just like your boyfriend do when he be about to bust that thing open. Bow, 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 busting it all up in your thing. Anyway, man. Anyway, continuing here. So, as a young man, Mr. Ernst Haeckel said he had held to progressive liberal politics, but during the 1860s he moved to the right, becoming an ardent supporter of Bismarck and German unification and nationalism. As a nationalist, he was haunted by a deep dread of the biological deterioration of the German people. Like most of his contemporaries, he held that non-European races were radically inferior. For example, he held that Negroes were incapable of a true inner culture and of a higher mental development. Anoints himself in Greece, governed by caprice. However, in keeping with a major shift in post-1870 racism, he was more preoccupied with the elaboration of theories that centered on the internal subdivision of European peoples into distinct races, a concern that linked indirectly to the deepening competition between European states. Thus, he regarded the German Aryans as the highest form of human evolution, the group that he had been able to outstrip all other branches in the career of civilization. Haeckel was quite typical of the European-wide movement towards a racialized concept of the nation. He rejected a liberal view of the nation-state as an expression of democratic will, a constitutional and voluntaristic binding together of individuals regulated by contract and law, for a conservative, organic theory of community based on race, language, and history. This Volkish concept of the nation, rooted in the German Romantic and anti-Enlightenment tradition and the idea of an organic community, lent itself ideally to elaboration in the new language of evolutionary biology. Going now to the comments. I'm in your house did the skull emoji. All right. Doer of L said, you should go on tour to the Laugh Factory. Well, thank you, man. I could do stand-up. I think I'm smart enough, clever enough, handsome enough, sexy enough, chocolate enough to do stand-up comedy. But I would rather be your teacher. I'd rather be your teacher to stop people saying the stupid shit that you were saying, Doer of L. I'd rather try to educate and enlighten and bring light to the people rather than make people laugh. We can make people laugh while we're learning. Anyway, continuing here to Ernst Haeckel, right? This guy here sounds like a lot of the 4chan people today. He sounds like a lot of the people that are in my comment section today, basically who think that the nation state is all about people who share a certain blood, a certain skin color, a certain language, and belong to the same race. This is still an idea that permeates today as we're seeing fascism take over in America, where Trump is saying stuff like immigrants are coming to our country, poisoning the blood of our nation. Now, America, last time I checked, is not a nation built on a blood. It's not a nation built on an ethnic group. It's not a nation built on a religion or a certain language. It's built on an idea that there could be multiracial, multi-ethnic people who believe in the rule of law governing us and a secular democracy that covers all people's rights and no one person is above the law. But now that idea has changed, and the right-wing people who tend to uphold the Constitution and think that it was sent down by Jesus Christ himself in the name of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they now think suddenly that there is a certain blood in our nation, that we have a Christian nation, an Anglo-Saxon nation, a white nation that needs to maintain its identity. The nation state needs to go, in my opinion. It's outlived its usefulness. Continuing here. So, in Haeckel's monist philosophy, it was the duty of the most advanced race nation to ensure not only its own survival, but to maximize its power, the species' domination of territory, since this was in the long-term interest of all future humankind. This could only be achieved if the individual, instead of trying to maximize his own happiness, heroically sacrificed himself to the higher good of the organic community. Such a theory could lend itself to an extremely authoritarian form of politics. In the struggle for the survival of the fittest race, a contest in which millions were pitted against each other in a fight to the death, the survival of the individual was of little significance. The life of each person was of relative value depending on the contribution which he or she could make to the continuity of the group as a whole. Haeckel's Social Darwinism opened the door to a disquieting vision of individual human life as expendable according to racial criteria of species worth. Since Negroes were closer to apes and dogs than to Europeans, he wrote, we must therefore assign a totally different value to their lives. This view, which was held widely by those commenting on colonial expansion, led to the acceptance of the necessary extermination of lower types, like the Tasmans or the Hottentot. Applied to the eugenic purification and strengthening of the national race, it opened the door to the elimination of the biologically weak. Haeckel's anti-humanist philosophy, in line with the ideas of Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, and some other contemporaries, attacked Christianity for the promulgation of a moral code which was fundamentally dysgenic, since it valued the life of the weak and feeble, and preached peace, submission, and reconciliation, rather than determined struggle. Since the Christian West, over 2 millennia, had laid an emphasis on the overvaluation of individual life, this had only served to distort natural selection and led to the evolution of a sickly humanity. In taking such a position, Haeckel claimed not only to be operating from any system of moral values, rather the iron laws of nature determined everything, no matter how harsh its dictates may have seemed. So basically what Haeckel is saying here is that as Europe continues to expand and we meet and greet other races in our quest to conquer the world, different values need to be placed on other people's lives. The Negro, as he is closer to an ape or a dog, is okay, it's okay for the Negro to go extinct if it means the betterment of the human race as a whole. If we wipe out all of Africa or all of Asia just for the sake of expanding our stock as a superior type of human, we're doing an overall good thing. And remember that Christianity stuff that we said was the reason we're colonizing the world? Yeah, all that stuff has to go. All that stuff has to go in the quest for markets, domination, and control. That's why Nietzsche was writing about a slave morality. Christianity, to some degree, is a slave morality. Anyway, continuing here, warfare and colonial conquest. The logic, go into the comments real quick. Go into the comments. Dorvell says, I'm a subscriber not getting notifications. When will you be live next? I have to go get my grandson registered for technical college. Okay, well, shout out Dorvell. Just subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. I go live every day, and we read for at least 1 hour every day as we continue to finish up these books. And let me make sure that I'm on the right track. What part are we going to finish off on? Okay, so we're reading until... Sorry, I just have to check real quick. Let me make sure. Hope y'all are still with me. Let me just pop open this computer because I set a time, or I set a page that I said I was going to stop on. So let me just make sure we're on the right track. All right, the influence of social Darwinism and eugenics. Okay, so we have a few more sections to go. We're going to stop at the influence of social Darwinism and eugenics on page 48. Okay, so... yeah, we have about 8 more pages to go until we finish up. So, all right, let's continue here. Continuing here. So, The logic of the internal racism, centered on the biological fitness of the nation, can be seen in its connection to militarism and the degree of preparedness of the racial community to engage in a struggle for survival with other global competitors. The racialization of European nationalism can be illustrated by the tension between France and Germany after the Franco-Prussian War and the annexation of Alsace. The leading French anthropologist de Quatrefages claimed in 1872 that the invasion of France and the barbaric bombardment of Paris was the work of the Prussian race that was corrupted by mixing with dark Mongoloid, Finnish, and Slavonic elements. In contrast, the French and Southern Germans were of a more advanced Aryan type. This triggered a major controversy with the progressive German anthropologist Virchow, who believed that the differences between people were more cultural than physical. Throughout Europe, the growing concern over racial degeneration found expression in the statistical analysis of the physique of military recruits. In 1867, the French press had reported widely on the increasing number of stunted individuals who were unsuitable for the army. In Britain, the high level of illness and deformity found among those recruited during the Boer War led to the establishment of a parliamentary inquiry in 1902. Among the public, this linked to a deepening gloom and anxiety that was rooted in a dim awareness that Britain, challenged by Germany, France, and the USA, was in decline as a world power. I remember reading about that in the book I reviewed on my channel, Black and British, by David Olusoga. Y'all go check that out. Y'all go check out that book, David Olusoga, Black and British. Dope book that I recommend everybody read. And in that book, he was talking about how, the British were so disgusted that so many men in their country were not fit to serve in the army, that it was pushed that, we do need to recruit black soldiers, because the idea of racialism is that it can morph and change anytime. So even though the Negro is lazy, he's naturally strong and beautiful and has a fit physique, and he's prepared for war at any time. So there was this push to recruit black men into the British armed forces because so many white men were ill-suited to the task. Anyway, continuing here. Such anxiety was a key element in the growth of the eugenics movement after 1900. In 1900, the leading social Darwinist Karl Pearson lectured with enthusiasm on the positive and progressive functions of war. The struggle for existence meant suffering, intense suffering, but a redeeming feature of sacrifice was that the fitter race would survive, the fiery crucible out of which comes the finer metal. Pearson, like so many of his contemporaries, assumed without question that he was himself a member of the master group, of that organized whole that was kept up to a high pitch of internal efficiency by ensuring that its members are substantially recruited from the better stocks, and kept up to a high pitch of external efficiency by contest. However, some eugenics experts were concerned that warfare, by leading to higher mortality among the cream of the nation's stock, the young, courageous, fit, and intelligent officer class, would damage the racial stock. The German biologist Plotz even advocated that the physically unfit should be sent to the battlefield, while the superior type was reserved for racial reproduction. As we shall see below, during the First World War, Britain and France deployed huge numbers of inferior black colonial troops in the most deadly frontline assaults, thus conserving the national race. So basically what he's saying here is that the Germans, the British, the French, the French and the British used inferior black people, even though they were the ones who were able to go to war, because so many of the young white men were not actually tall enough or healthy enough to actually go to the front lines. But they were saying that they were inferior by just the fact that they were black, not the fact that these were men who could jump higher and run longer and lift more than the white men who were coughing and wheezing back on base. Continuing here. The social Darwinist drive towards the eugenic creation of a powerful militarized community that could triumph in any conflict with other European states also linked up to a colonial expansion and social imperialism. During the age of new imperialism and the partition of Africa, 1875 and 1912, European powers were concerned to procure a strong growth rate in the metropolitan white population of a hardy and intelligent breed in order to settle and govern the new colonies and to defend them against the challenge offered by other European nations, as well as against indigenous lower races. Galton, the founding father of eugenics, who had traveled widely in Africa, looked to a future in which the Anglo-Saxon race would achieve demographic world domination. In no nation was a high breed more necessary, for we plant our stock over the world and lay the foundations of the dispositions and capacities of future millions of the human race. For Haeckel, who worked for imperialism through most of the Monist League and the Pan-Germanic League, the establishment of new colonies, particularly a Mittel Africa, I don't know what Mittel means in German, maybe that's little Africa, in the Congo, would ensure the creation of a healthy and biologically fit German community in all parts of the world. The geographer Friedrich Ratzel coined the term Lebensraum to express the concept of an expansionist organic national community that would be built upon Lebensraum, a program that would regenerate racial vigor through a holistic sense of nature. Each major European colonial power had ambitions to be not only the empire, but also the white race on which the sun never set. Okay, interesting. Interesting. So basically, transnational whiteness, the idea that, we are all white and it's the idea that we're going to spread our seed and dominate the world was a part of every European empire. It was implicitly part of the project of nation building for all European societies that were going through that transition at the turn of the century. Race and the eugenic movement. Eugenic ideas were widely debated in Europe from 1860 onwards, although the term, which means good in birth or noble in hereditary, was not invented by Francis Galton until 1883. The movement has been frequently analyzed in relation to negative eugenics, which emphasize the most controversial forms of suppression of the racially feeble, and positive eugenics, which promoted steps to encourage or enhance the birth rate of the biologically superior individuals or groups. Negative eugenics has received more attention from historians since its methods appear to have laid the basis for the worst excesses of National Socialism. There is undoubtedly a risk of falsifying history by reading back into European history from the stance of the post-Holocaust age, signs of the road to Auschwitz, of a coherent exterminationist logic, where none existed. Our understanding of pre-1914 history can be distorted through the selection of evidence pointing towards a genocidal logic and the failure to recognize countervailing information. However, that having been said, the prevalence of ideas about population culling in European society and across the political spectrum does point to the spread of authoritarian forms of thought and a disturbing trend towards the dehumanization of both the working class residuum and of minorities, the Jews, the disabled, the immigrants. So basically what he's saying here is that if you go back and look at those books that the people were writing in the beginning of the eugenics movement, late 19th century, early 20th century, you could say, wow, I'm not surprised these people did the Holocaust. But that's looking at it with our advantage of hindsight, knowing what happened in the 20th century and where a lot of it led to. And of course, not everybody back then was genocidal or racist or thinking of these eugenic terms. Some people were speaking out against it, right? But still, it does have to be taken into account, even if these people were not directly leading towards the Holocaust or knew exactly where it would go, or maybe they intended it to happen to other people and not to Europeans themselves. It still has to be taken into consideration as to the motivating factors to how these things played out in the 20th century. Let's continue here. Negative eugenics proposed the drastic termination of the breeding capacity of individuals or groups that were perceived to carry hereditary traits that would damage the future biological fitness of the race nation. Most of the adherents of negative policies shared the germ plasm theory of Weizmann, or similar ideas, according to which the genetic characteristics of parents which were transmitted to offspring could not, in any way, be transformed by environment. This led to the logic, often pushed to the extreme, that programs of social reform, healthcare, education, and general welfare were radically dysgenic, since not only could they not improve the genetic quality of the sick and degenerate, but they also ensured their unnatural survival. The main solution to this was sought through the enforced sterilization or castration of criminals, the physically handicapped, the mentally ill, and the diseased, whose condition was regarded, in a secular version of original sin, as the outcome of impurity, nature's punishment of racial degenerates for their alcoholism, uncontrolled sexuality, and atavistic savagery. An alternative strategy was to enforce the isolation of the degenerates in total institutions, prisons, hospitals, asylums, and work camps, so that they were prevented from reproducing. Haeckel, for example, proposed that criminals should be executed since their criminality was an inherited characteristic that could not be reformed, while the insane and incurably feeble could be referred to a commission which could adjudicate on euthanasia by a dose of some painless and rapid poison. Haeckel also admired the Spartans, as did Hitler, for their careful selection of newborn children and the killing of those who were weak, sickly, or affected with any bodily infirmity. Some German and British doctors so lost touch with their professional ethics as to tolerate venereal disease, tuberculosis, and other deadly microbes as the friends of the race through elimination of the unfit. As we shall see, however, such radical ideas were the exception and, before 1914, made little impact politically and rarely translated into legislation. Positive eugenics was concerned with the supportive natalistic programs to ensure that the maximum number of sound babies would be born, an issue of demographic quantity, or more frequently, of quality, measures to encourage and foster the birth of children to couples selected from the superior physical and racial stock. Eugenic thinkers in Britain, France, and Germany were interested in finding the means to encourage marriage only between ideal partners, or at least couples who were free from negative genetic qualities that might be inherited by their offspring. Galton and the psychologist Havelock Ellis both supported the idea of encouraging ideal partnerships by ensuring that those intending to marry were able to offer their guarantee of eugenic certificates. One writer stated in 1904, "When a young man and a young woman offering themselves for marriage can produce certified records of their ancestry back for 3 or 4 generations, showing that their progenitors have been entirely or largely free from nervous prostration, sick headaches, neurasthenia, hysteria, and melancholia, St. Vitus dance, epilepsy, syphilis, alcoholism, pauperism, criminality, prostitution, and insanity, then it may truly be said that such a union may be correctly styled as a eugenic marriage." You know, when I got married, I was shocked. I was shocked that before I got married, I had to take a blood test. In America, we don't do that. In America, we don't do that. For all the worst things about America, as racist as it is, we don't do eugenic marriages like how they do it in other countries. I did not know I had to get a blood test to marry my wife. And then I will never forget the first time I got married, I took that blood test and the person said, "You two have different blood. You should not marry." And I've never heard that from anybody ever. Never heard that from anybody ever. There is no reason why people of different blood types can't get married, right? Now, people of different astrological signs definitely should not get married. If you're a Cancer and she's a Sagittarius, run. But people of different blood types, I guess not. Eugenic marriages. It's still happening, by the way. It's still happening, man. Try to go marry that badass Moroccan. They're going to make you take a blood test. In France, there was a long eugenic campaign to introduce a premarital examination law that would screen for tuberculosis, venereal disease, alcoholism, and the abnormal. In Germany, during the 1880s, a group of young biologists centered on Alfred Plotz made plans for utopian colonies that would screen the health and biological suitability of incoming members to guarantee racial purity. Plotz himself went through an agonizing search for a wife who would be the correct German stock. Similar sanitary utopias promoted in England by Galton, Richardson, and Bellamy included faddish proposals for clean air, temperance, cycling, sunshine, and land work, alongside measures for racial health and selection. Imagine joining a colony, but they said you can only join if you take a 23andMe. Oh wait, I think that's Israel. One controversial aspect of the proposals for breeding colonies was differences of opinion over the criteria to be used for selecting those who constituted the ideal racial stock. As we have seen, the deep anxiety of broad sectors of the European bourgeoisie, confronted with the growth of an impoverished and potentially revolutionary working class, frequently translated into a racialization of class conflict. The lower orders were seen, quite literally, as a different and savage race. However, the lower orders tended to have large families, while the bourgeoisie were already restricting their family size with success. The nightmare scenario of the educated middle classes was that they would be outnumbered and swamped by the primitive lower orders, just like the small numbers of European masters in the colonies who could be overrun at any moment by native hordes. Within European society, if the genetically unfit race was the degenerate working class, then the superior breeding group came from the middle class professionals and intelligentsia, to which the eugenicists themselves belonged. Of course. The eugenicists recruited from a bourgeois meritocracy, on the whole opposed the concept of aristocracy, since the rules of primogeniture did not guarantee status and the power on the basis of biological fitness and intelligence, but from laws of inheritance that could promote the most physically and mentally feeble individuals. In general, eugenic projects to guarantee the greater breeding capacity of the superior racial stock can be interpreted as one facet of bourgeoisie crisis and insecurity at the turn of the century, a project to increase the demographic weight of the elites within the age of the masses. Very interesting way of looking at eugenics. Basically, it was the middle classes, the bourgeoisie, right? Who sat in between the lumpen proletariat and the owners of capital, right? Or even worse, the dying monarchist, right, who ruled societies, right? It was the bourgeoisie saying, hey, how about we take over? We're the fittest, we're the smartest, we're the most stable in the society. If only more people like us reproduced and our right genes were passed on, we could have more power in the society. It's another type of class war. If everything comes down to a war, it's class war. So eugenicists, however, did not project a utopian society in which only the super elite survived, since this carried the worrying prospect of a social order devoid of workers and servants. Vacher de la Puig held that Europe was inhabited by two key racial groups, the blonde Aryan and the long-skulled Homo europaeus, robust, energetic, of high intelligence, and a natural conqueror, and the Homo alpinus, a smaller, darker, short-skulled, and more primitive type, who served as slaves to the former. The goal of eugenics was to prevent the latter outbreeding the former and becoming dominant. But at the same time, the strong, though inferior, alpine race needed to be retained as a workforce. Once again, it can be seen that an anthropological science that analyzed class in terms of race served as a thin disguise for the status quo and a legitimation of existing class relations. There was a close linkage here to the rationale of colonialism, the racism that described black slaves as of low intelligence, but physically strong and ideally suited to the work of a plantation economy, was similar in structure to the racism that denoted the working class as a biological group that was naturally suited to industrial labor. So basically what he's saying here is that, the eugenicists at the time, the Europeans, were dividing themselves amongst races and saying, hey, we got two types of white people. We have the alpine, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall, white Aryans, and then we have the Homo alpinus, right? They're the small, dark, short ones who are like, grabby, touchy, sell you stuff. And we need to keep them in check. We need to outbreed them. But we also need to keep them as sort of slaves to us, is what he's essentially trying to say, right? Once again, they practiced on themselves before they got to us. Nelson Moreno says, now Whitey is being replaced. Hope so. We want to eliminate whiteness with justice. We want to eliminate whiteness with justice. We want to eliminate whiteness with justice. Continuing here. The broader ideas of social imperialism and national efficiency were closely tied into the needs of industrial capitalism. State welfare and eugenic programs were directed towards the breeding of a strong, energetic, and dedicated workforce. The economic and productivist functionality of eugenics was also shown by the detailed calculations that were made as to the enormous social costs presented by the care and institutionalization of criminals, the feeble-minded and the sickly, dysfunctional beings who would be better eliminated. American studies of the delinquent and feeble-minded descendants of a notorious New York family, the Jukes, estimated that they had cost the state government $2 million by 1916, while the cost of sterilizing the original Juke pair would have been $150. During the interwar period, Sicard de Plazol, in his Principles of Hygiene, published in 1927, developed a Taylorist eugenics that would procure the best human capital at lower costs, the art of procreating, perfecting, and utilizing man as a work-producing machine. Thus, the eugenics movement in Europe can be located within a much broader development of social imperialism and of state welfare programs to improve national efficiency, or as Michel Foucault has termed it, strategies of biopower. As military and economic tensions increased between European powers, so governments began to realize that it was in the national interest to promote the overall physical health and well-being of the working class. Marxists had traditionally interpreted the capitalist system as one that would inflict deepening levels of exploitation and misery upon the working class. However, conservative leaders from Bismarck to Joseph Chamberlain came to see the social welfare programs, medical and unemployment insurance, pensions, health care, could serve to undermine the position of the revolutionary left, reduce class conflict, and generate a sense of corporate and national solidarity. The total energy of the race nation would be gathered together and focused in the most powerful way on the struggle with other nations. Such diffuse forms of national socialism, which were influential across the political spectrum, were linked to further aspects of self-referential racism, of which two were considered here. Firstly, the role of motherhood, and secondly, sporting techniques for the production of ideal white bodies. All right, so we're gonna wrap this up right here, and we'll pick up with this section right here, eugenics, race, and motherhood. We'll start on this in our next live stream tomorrow, because we're going to go live every day for at least an hour. We ran a bit over on this one. We've been going hard in the yard for a while here, about an hour and a half. So we're going to wrap this up here. Hope you enjoyed this live stream. Racism in Europe by Neil MacMaster is a fabulous book. I really enjoyed talking about it and reading it with all of you, and giving some feedback to the people that jumped into the live stream. Let me give a quick shout out to everybody in here. We have Nelson Moreno. We have Door of L. We have I'm in Your House. Who else came in here? We had my guy Andre Beja. He was in the chat for a while as well. And shout out to everybody who's going to watch this in the playback. Let me know what you think about this live stream, what you think about this book. Any other books that you recommend, we will be trying to cover them. Y'all be easy out there, and peace.